On this episode of the William Hill Sports Book Club, we are looking at a stunning biography of one of the greatest golfers of all time, Rory McIlroy.
I bumped into Rory in the parking lot on Sunday night, total happenstance after the tournament was over. And he said, "Oh, thanks for the book. I started reading it and it made me laugh and I liked it." And so I think I'm in a good place with Rory. And on a human level, that's nice. But again, I didn't write the book for him. So if he hated it, I probably would have been okay with it as well.
After completing the slam of majors in 2025, golf writer Alan Shipnuck set about telling the story of the working class kid from a war-torn country who's had incredible highs and lows on and off the golf course.
It was so cinematic, and you could see it, the whole story play out on Rory's face. You know, all the toil, all the devastation, all the disappointment, and all of that just being lifted and released.
The McIlroy biography, Rory, by Alan Shipnuck, is what we're reading on this episode of the William Hill Sports Book Club. Hi there, I'm Adrian Durham, and this is the William Hill Sports Book Club. I'm joined, as ever, on the show by William Hill book reader Neil Foggin, and you have been badgering me for a long, long time about this particular book that we're going to do. So what did you like about Rory by Alan Shipnuck?
Alan's a great writer. He's had 2 books in before. So as soon as the publisher got in touch and said, look, Alan's got a new book coming out, I thought, we've got to do this. We've got to do this. And this book is great. If you're into golf, you're going to love it. And even if you're not into golf, you're going to enjoy it.
And the reason we're doing it, it's going to be a contender for the William Hill Sports Book of the Year. And we need entries for the William Hill Sports Book of the Year, don't we?
We are open, a little bit later than normal, but we are now open and we're going through a few books at the moment. So please get your books in early. There's 2 new deadlines. So if your book was published from the 1st of October to the 31st of March, get it in before the 15th of May. And then afterwards, anything after that, you've got 6 weeks to get your book in.
Right, you know the rules, get the books in because we want to read them, basically. Now, the author of Rory is the celebrated American golf writer Alan Shipnuck, who joins us on the show live from the States. Alan, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
No, it's good to have you back on. I think I'm right in saying that you have the honour of being the very first guest on the William Hill Sports Book Club show to do it twice. So can I just ask how you're feeling about that?
I've had many great honors in my career, but obviously that's the top of the list.
You are breaking new ground. The first book was Live and Let Die, about LIV Golf. We'll talk to you about LIV Golf a little bit later on because it's very topical at the moment. And it was a great book as well. It was a terrific read. This book asks the question, what is Rory McIlroy really like? It got off to a shaky start for you, though, didn't it? Because you were responsible for Rory double bogeying the opening hole at the US Open. Is that correct?
I don't know how responsible it actually was, but the timing is interesting. We'll say that. Yes, everyone wants to know, when you do a biography, what is the subject's involvement? So I figured I would just address that right at the start of the book. And so I get into my long relationship with Rory. I mean, not to spoil too much, but the book begins, we're on a private jet flying across China. This is in 2012. So I've covered Rory his entire career, and I've been there for all the heartaches and all the triumphs. And it's been a great, it's just great content. You know, the guy chews the scenery. He lives big. His wins and losses are unforgettable. But, like any long-term relationship, we've had our ups and downs, Rory and I. And so when I told him I was doing this book, he was a little less than thrilled because Rory loves to have control over everything in his life. And he knew he would have no such control over this book. And so what you're alluding to is at the US Open at Oakmont last summer, on Friday, the second round, I was standing on the driving range, just sort of whispering to Rory's manager, Sean O'Flaherty. We've had open lines of communication throughout the process of doing the book. And Rory turned around and saw me, and he was in a weird headspace. We all kind of saw it after the Masters, where he had this existential crisis. He'd been to the mountaintop, and now he was trying to figure out what was going to come next. And so he saw me, and he very impolitely asked me to leave the driving range. One of the words started with F and ended with K, and there was 2 letters in between. And, so that was an uncomfortable moment. There was a packed grandstand behind me, about 1,000 people. There were cameras everywhere. So I did as I was asked. and I did wander off. But I waited for Rory in the parking lot afterwards, and we had a philosophical discussion about the book. And it's fine. I think when you're writing a biography, that if you're too close to the subject, that's not helpful. I think as a writer, you have to have a certain amount of remove. And so Rory declined to participate. I think in a lot of ways helped me, because if we'd sat for interviews, he's so charismatic and there's such a cult of personality around Rory. I might have seen things through his eyes a little too much. So I was always going to write the book I wanted to write. Rory's disinclination to participate, that was fine. I was somewhat anticipated.
In terms of what he said to you, and obviously we can't repeat the words, I think people have got the gist of what he said to you. How did that impact you emotionally? Was that just another one of those things and you've just got to be resilient to it? Or did you actually start to think, maybe I shouldn't be doing this book?
Well, that's life in the big leagues. You know, if you're a reporter and you do the job long enough and you do it a certain way, every now and then the players, the athletes are going to be displeased. And I've dealt with this throughout my career. Like, I don't write for the golfers. I write it for the fans. And it's a very different distinction. I mean, the readers, that's the audience that I treasure. That's a sacred relationship to me. And sometimes in the service of giving to them straight and telling the story honestly, the players are going to be unhappy. So I've dealt with this before. It wasn't comfortable to have the reigning Masters champion dropping F-bombs on me. But I actually said this to his manager, O'Flaherty. I said, despite the way that Rory treated me, this is a very feel-good book. It's an uplifting tale. I have always had a lot of admiration for Rory, the way he's carried himself. And so I said, I'm just going to treat that as an aberration. I really didn't let it affect anything in the creation of the book. But there is, when Rory, as you said, when he went out and right after that confrontation and made a double bogey at Oakmont, I allowed myself the tiniest bit of pleasure, but as a consummate professional, to not leak into my prose. But there is a happy ending, because I live near Pebble Beach, California. The tournament came to town a couple months ago. Rory was the defending champion, so I gave O'Flaherty a couple copies of the book for him and for Rory to read. And I said, I wouldn't give this book to you so far in advance if I thought you were going to hate it. Like, if you can read it with an open mind, I think you'll see it. It's a very uplifting story, and I think I captured who Rory is. And yes, he's had a little controversy in his love life and his business life, and that's in the book because it has to be. But ultimately, I do think it's a feel-good story. And so I bumped into Rory in the parking lot on Sunday night, total happenstance, after the tournament was over. And he said, "Oh, thanks, thanks for the book. I started reading it, and it made me laugh, and I liked it." And so I think I'm in a good place with Rory. And on a human level, that's nice. But again, I didn't write the book for him. So if he hated it, I probably would have been okay with it as well.
That is a nice story for that. A little bit of closure there, but I love the fact that he's reading it,
yes,
and that he's been positive about it. And Neil, you really like the fact that story with the expletive in is in the foreword. So you basically start this book with that story. You love that.
It's explosive, and I thought, here we go. Sit back, let's get it stuck in here, and it's brilliant. And what I really like about this book is that the first 7 or 8 chapters are important because it gives you the backstory to Rory. Then you can start thinking about that's why he says that later on, and that's why he's got those views, and it sets it up. And the way that Alan writes, I'm not a massive golf fan, but the way he writes about explaining the holes and shots, etc., it's all in your head. You just got this visual picture. I think it's a great book.
Yeah, I mean, that description is great writing, which we know you're obviously capable of and you've been doing for a long time, Alan. But that McIlroy family background stuff is detailed in there, and I think it is really important. You've been to places, you've visited places, you've spoken to people, particularly in Rory's story. It's important because of his Irishness, because of the troubles where he grew up, and he had family who died because of the troubles as well. You tell the story of that. But also, I think, probably most importantly, with the working class background of his mother and his father, Jerry and Rosie, is it fair to say that that background kind of fueled the fire in Rory? I find him to be, I think it is a very positive look at Rory McIlroy. I love the fact that he seeks decency and justice in things, sometimes gets his reaction overreaction, wrong to things, but don't we all? He's also not afraid to voice his opinions on people. And I think that all of this you can see in the background, which you detail at the start, and it comes out in the book.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, you look at the biggest stars of the last 30 plus years in golf. It's Tiger Woods, Phil Mickelson, Rory McIlroy. The two of them have been completely sidetracked by scandal and addiction and vice and greed. And Rory just sails along. And so much of it is because of his upbringing. You know, he just had great parents, and he came from this small town, and he's never forgotten who he is and where he's from. And the McIlroys enjoy the finer things in life. You know, Jerry McIlroy, Rory's dad, always has a really nice watch on. You know, Rory has the mansions and the jets and all that. But, you know, they still have dirt under their fingernails, you know, metaphorically. Like, they are a very working class family, and because they've kept those values and this feeling of who they really are. You don't begrudge them the success, and you actually root for them because they have a gratitude. You know, Rory's always carried this sense of wonder of who he is and this life he gets to lead. And that's a very winning quality. And, you know, his closest friends are the kids he grew up with in this little town, Hollywood, outside of Belfast. And so as these other players have gotten completely sidetracked and lost their way, he just has a very strong sense of who he is. And that's why he's been able to handle fame and fortune and all the other complications of superstardom. And so it was fundamental to tell this whole tale and get into the fun details of his upbringing and this little club where he grew up playing and where he was this prodigy, and everyone recognized that he was this very special talent, and yet strive to keep this normalcy around him. And, you know, there's a funny quote in there from one of the family friends who said, yeah, you know, if Rory ever got out of line in school, I would just tell Rosie and Jerry, and they would take care of it. You know, that was kind of the community around him. And so I think that's why Rory is so beloved. There's a sense of he knows who he is. He hasn't forgotten his roots. He's still a normal person despite this superstar talent. And that it's really important too, because when you look in the context of not only, you know, the golfers, but big time athletes in general, that so many of them lose their way. How has Rory avoided all these pitfalls? Well, if you read chapter 1, you'll understand why.
Yeah, and there's a great story later on when he's won majors and he's in a bar, I think, with his dad and others, and his dad says something. I won't spoil it. There's no spoilers going on here, but he says something that shows that Rory is still Jerry's son. There's still a hierarchy there, even though he's this world superstar. And I think this is so important. There's a very human side of Rory McIlroy that comes through in the book that I think that Rory, if he reads it, would like. I think that's why he would enjoy the book. He's still thinking about missing a putt 17 years after it happened. Also, the fact that he drank wine, then went on Twitter, and then tweeted awkwardly, then gave his phone to his wife and told her to change the password. And there's countless people listening to this, watching this right now, who have been in that exact same position as Rory McIlroy.
Exactly. It's why I want to do this book, and I think it's why people have reacted so strongly to his Masters victories, particularly in 2025, is that he's just such a human person. And that sounds redundant, but in the sports world especially, there's all this artificiality that surrounds the players, and they can become so remote. You know, Tiger Woods had a fortress around his inner self. No one ever knew who Tiger was. I'm not sure Tiger knew who he was. And so while we were thrilled to watch him make history, you didn't feel that emotional connection. With Rory, you do, because he's just been so vulnerable. He's been so emotionally available, and he wears his heart on his sleeve. So when he breaks up with his fiancée, you know, the tennis player, Caroline Wozniacki, he goes into a press conference that day and pours his heart out in front of everybody. And then 5 days later, he comes from 7 shots back and he wins the tournament. And it's all on display with Rory. And that's why you're sucked into it, because ultimately sports, what makes it so compelling is the human story. You know, otherwise it's just guys hitting 7 irons, and who really cares about that? It's the triumph over the adversity. It's the sense that you're on this journey with this athlete, And Rory has let us into his heart in a way that almost no modern golfer ever has, and very few athletes in general. And so it's reciprocated by the fans. Like they feel this connection and they feel this warmth toward him because he has let them in, and that's just so rare.
Oh, it absolutely is. There's another great little story about when he gets, I think it's his first tour win, and then he goes to an ATM, goes to a cash machine. After that, those winnings have been shoveled into his bank account, and he literally can't believe what he sees at the ATM. And I think it's really heartwarming. He's so, it's how we would all react if we had that amount of money suddenly in our bank account. And it's just a beautiful story. And I mean, you putting that story in there, getting that story, finding that story, putting it in the book is so revealing about Rory himself.
Yeah, and then he goes and he buys the biggest, gaudiest, ugliest watch anyone's ever bought. And it's quite funny because years later he says, "Oh, that was terrible. I can't believe I bought that watch." And it's like it just all comes full circle because, as you said, we would all love to go to our ATM and see we have 400,000 pounds all of a sudden. What would we do? Probably something stupid, which is exactly what Rory did.
Yeah.
But to his credit, he tells the story and he laughs about it. And Rory doesn't take himself too seriously. That's another quality that you can enjoy. Like he will laugh at himself. And for celebrities in general, I think that's rare. They're in this ecosystem where everyone's always kissing up to them and they're always telling them they're perfect. But Rory can see through that. He's like, yeah, that was ridiculous. Why did I buy a $25,000, diamond encrusted watch? And so it's a very cute story, but it also reveals something deeper.
And one of the great things about these books, and this book in particular, is, I'm going through YouTube and looking at some of the golf shots that he's hit on the way to winning these majors, the shots that you talk about in the book, but also I looked up that watch and it is horrendous. What was he thinking?
Yeah, well, he's 21 years old. He didn't know any better.
We all did stupid things at that age. That's absolutely true. Alan, Rory's fight against LIV Golf is a fascinating section of the book. And before we talk about that section, about Rory's involvement, as we record this today, news is breaking that the Saudis are pulling their money out of LIV Golf. So you wrote Live and Let Die, the book about LIV Golf. It's the text. It's the book you have to read to understand what happened, why it happened at that time. But is that it now? Is LIV Golf over?
Well, they're not exactly. They're funded through the end of this season, so they have another half dozen tournaments. It'll limp along. The real question is, and this is the mandate of all the leadership now, and they just put two new people on the board of directors who are money guys, is can they find outside investment to sustain it? Certainly, the era of decadence is over. None of these guys are going to be living like Louis XIV anymore. But can they bring in new sponsorship and keep LIV going in some capacity? And there's a way forward. I mean, the brand has a lot of equity. They've done a great job conquering some global capitals and bringing golf to places that have been starved for big time golf. And so, but the $33 million purses and the signing bonuses and the guaranteed contracts, that's all going to go away. LIV could endure as a decent mid-sized tour, and some of these players have nowhere else to go, and so they would probably stick around. So there may yet still be a LIV Golf, but it's not going to be what it was. And this notion that it was going to come in and change golf forever and upend the status quo. Clearly, the PGA Tour and the European Tour have won that war, and they've thwarted this challenge. And LIV Golf, as we know it, is certainly over. It may stay on as a smaller, less ambitious and less noisy enterprise, but the heyday of LIV Golf certainly over.
So you mentioned some of those golfers there who have nowhere else to go. I was talking to a friend of mine who's big on golf, in particular British golfers, some of those who've signed up to LIV Golf. I mean, they won't be welcome back on the European Tour. They won't be welcome back in the USA. So what is going to happen to those guys?
Well, the European Tour has been more forgiving. They cut a deal with some of the top LIV players to allow them to have dual membership earlier this year. You have to pay a fine, and you have to agree to some other stipulations, like playing a certain number of events and that the tour will dictate. That's why John Rahm has not agreed to that deal so far, because he didn't want to have anyone tell him where he has to play. But 8 other LIV golfers agreed to it. So there will be some element of amnesty, but it's going to be punitive. and it's probably not going to be for everybody. That the existing tours in Europe and the US now are in a position of strength. They can set all the rules and they can pick and choose which players they want by very narrowly tailoring the criteria. So there's no doubt when, it was always a risk to go to LIV Golf. There was always a chance this would blow away in a sandstorm. And, to quote Don Draper, that's what the money was for. They were trying to pay people up front to say, we know you're taking a leap of faith here. We have to make it worth your while. And some guys are going to get burned. That's the bottom line.
Yeah, I mean, some of the numbers that have been around since LIV Golf started, some of the numbers being linked with certain golfers have been absolutely extraordinary. How bad has this been for the game?
Well, for the players, it's been great. It's been a bonanza. This is the best time ever to be a good golfer because the money has become astronomical. LIV Golf made a huge investment in the Asian tour and has made it much stronger and a much more viable developmental circuit. So that's a nice piece of the legacy. But on the whole, LIV has just been a chaos merchant, and it has sowed a lot of division, a lot of bitchiness. It has been a divisive force in the sport, and it's created this situation for years now where the best players were rarely competing against each other. You had the DeChambos and the Rahms and the Koepkas playing on LIV, and the only time they played the best players from around the world were at the major championships 4 times a year. Like, that's untenable for a sport. You would not have a Formula One race with no Verstappen or Hamilton. Like, you need your stars. And so it's put golf in this very awkward situation. Over the next year or two, a lot of these players will get absorbed back into the existing tours in some fashion, and that stain on the game will go away. But players like Rahm have sacrificed a lot of their prime playing on a tour that ultimately is going to be remembered as a failure, and that's sad. If you look at John Rahm, he was on a historic trajectory before he went to LIV Golf, winning a Masters, winning a U.S. Open, still a young guy, and now the last 3 years he's basically been a non-factor in world professional golf. And so can he get his career back on track? Like, that's an open question. So yeah, LIV will be remembered for doing a few things right. And another part of the legacy is they forced the PGA Tour to innovate and improve its product. So it's a mixed bag, but all of this, the quote unquote successes around LIV, are in relation to other tours, and what LIV itself created, any moments or memories it gave us, any positive impact on the sport, very negligible.
And Rory has been at the centre of this. You talk about how USPGA Tour has improved in the wake of what happened with LIV, and a lot of that was down to Tiger Woods' impact, but also Rory's impact in staying loyal to the tour and standing by what they thought was right, the legacy of golf they thought was really important, and Rory right at the very centre of that, and also to an extent a divisive character with it as well.
Well, it'll always be a very important part of Rory's legacy is he's helped save the PGA Tour. He was the biggest spokesperson. He was fighting the hardest for the institution of the tour, and he was the one. And Tiger was his wingman, but Rory did most of the heavy lifting on reshaping the PGA Tour on the fly during a very chaotic moment. And part of the business model of the PGA Tour has always been flawed. They had 48 tournaments a year, and the stars only played in about 20 of them. And so a lot of the tournaments were devalued, and they kind of watered down the product. Rory had this vision, and it sounds a little bit like LIV Golf, to have fewer tournaments, all the stars show up, bigger money, and he had the political capital and he had the vision to bring that to life. And by reshaping the PGA Tour and getting more money to the top players, that ended this exodus of guys going to LIV Golf. Rahm was the last one to do it at the end of 2023 because, Rory's new vision of the tour came online in the summer of 2023. And all the players on the PGA Tour said, hey, this is great. Why would I go anywhere? And so it's really a very important part of his legacy that he helped save the PGA Tour. Now, you're right. He was a divisive character, and he did make it personal. even as he was this very stately ambassador, he was also the biggest troll of LIV Golf. And he took a lot of shots at Greg Norman, at Phil Mickelson, at Sergio Garcia. He made it very personal. And, I'm sure on some level he regrets that, but that was just an extension of how much he cared. And like we were talking about earlier, Rory's a passionate guy and he's a little impetuous. And so he did not hold back. And while that made the discourse a little unpleasant, I think it was also important that the biggest star in the sport had that much passion for the PGA Tour. It set the tenor for everybody else. Like, okay, we got to get on board here. Like, if this guy cares so much, I have to care too. And so it was part of Rory's leadership that he just put it all on the line.
Top of page 204, there's a quote from Tiger Woods, and it says, "Everyone respects Rory because of the person he is." That's a huge quote from Tiger Woods. And yes, they were on the same side. He's not going to say bad things about him. They were on the same side with the LIV Golf fight. But is that true, what Tiger says about Rory? Is that true in your experience, that everyone respects him because of the person he is?
100%. And he can possibly have more influence traveling the world and just modeling these behaviors than holding political office, right? I mean, Rory is the greatest export that the Irish island has ever had, as far as he's just the ideas that we have of people from that part of the world is just being affable and being fun loving and having a ready laugh. I mean, Rory embodies all of that. And the way he lives his life and the way he carries himself, I mean, he's just a great ambassador for humankind. And so maybe he can have more impact that way, just doing his thing, than he ever could holding office, because now he just lives his life the way he wants to. And, him and his wife and his daughter are in the process of relocating to London. And, Rory's sort of colonized and conquered America, and now he's sort of ready to go back closer to home. But again, it's how easily he moves through the world that he's an Irishman who's at home in London, who's at home in South Florida, and he's lived in Dubai, he's lived in Monte Carlo. Now there's some tax benefits to those last two. He's comfortable anywhere. That's a rare quality.
Now, Rory's love life is fascinating, Alan. It's part of the story, but I sense maybe part of you was a little bit reluctant to delve too deep into that side, that personal side of Rory and McIlroy. Have I read that right or not?
It's a question for every biographer, how much of the private life is relevant to a public figure. And because my last two books, the Mickelson biography and Live and Let Die, were so overheated and explosive and controversial, I wanted this book to have a different tenor. And so I think you're reading that correctly. I was a little reluctant to wade into it, but then I was already researching the book when Rory, filed for divorce. And then a month later, changed his mind, and him and his wife Erica reconciled. And of course, there were many headlines around this, and the Daily Mail printed a very salacious, sort of innuendo-filled story about Rory's supposed relationship with a TV announcer, and so at that point, when it's that public, it's sort of a dereliction of duty for me not to at least acknowledge it. And so I tried to thread the needle. I quoted the Daily Mail story. I had a few of my own thoughts, and then I tried to keep it moving. But I went to the Ryder Cup needing an ending to the book. And at the Ryder Cup, I'm sure a lot of fans heard and read that, Rory was the subject of a lot of abuse verbally. And it was all kind of in code language. There's reports, it crossed the line, it was overly personal, but no one really said what it was, which I found quite interesting. And for me, I was there at Bethpage, and I was inside the ropes walking Rory's matches. And I can tell you that the vast majority of the things that were said to him by these obnoxious fans were about his marriage, about his love life, about these rumors. And so at that point, again, I can't ignore the reality of what's happening on the ground. Anyone who was at Bethpage heard this. And so then this storyline resurfaces in the last chapter, but winning the Masters in 2025 kind of completed Rory's quest as a golfer. And I felt like what happened to Bethpage was kind of his redemption as a family man, as a husband, because the way he rallied around his wife, the the way he talked about her in the press conference. And I caught this very stolen moment of this incredibly passionate embrace. And, at the end of the Saturday session, after it had been, probably the most deplorable fan behavior in the history of golf, and he squeezed her so hard, and he whispered in his ear, and I was so close I could hear him whisper it. And he says, "I love you so much." And, their eyes were glistening, and it was this really powerful moment. That's kind of almost how we end the book. And it just gave it sort of a fairy tale ending. And so, at some point, the events of his life overtook my reticence, and we had to talk about, his marriage, but I think it was couched in a respectful way. And I think it tells a larger story. And, Rory talking about how 2025 was the greatest year of his life on and off the golf course. And that's what he's talking about. It's got to be brutally difficult to work on your marriage in the public eye. And yet, him and Erica showed a lot of grace, and they seem like they're living happily ever after. And so it just gives the book a really happy ending, but not in a fairy tale but in a real kind of gritty way because of what they went through at Bethpage. Yeah,
and I remember reading the biography a few years ago of Tiger, the famous Tiger biography, which they had to go into those details, and there's no happy ending on those personal details. But Foggy, when you're reading, when these books are being judged, if it's a biography of somebody, these details, whether personal or not, have to be in there, don't they? If they're not, you're left wondering, well, hang on a minute, where's the story about this? Where's this? Where's that story?
Well, you don't get a phone call saying, let's do that book, because there's no point doing it, because you need that information. And what I love about this book as well is his relationship with the Ryder Cup. He makes that comment many years ago, naively, about the Ryder Cup, and then we end the book last year with the Ryder Cup, and you think, wow, this is thing. And you've got to do the work. If you're not prepared to do the work, it doesn't go anywhere, your book.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely correct. And the Wozzle-Roy relationship that he had with Wozniacki, Wozzle-Roy is a great name for their relationship, by the way. When that comes to an end, there's an element of Rory's character which comes through here, which I thought it's a touch of kind of ironic genius, really. It made me laugh. And I've read this section to many friends, Alan, and because it's brilliantly written. He says in the book, he breaks off the engagement with Caroline Wozniacki. She doesn't know a lot about that, by the way. He then plays, you mentioned this earlier, plays in the tournament. And when asked if he considered withdrawing from the tournament, he says, and he's so, honest and open in how he says it, but doesn't realise what he's saying. Quote, "I made a commitment to be here. Once I gave my word, I wasn't going to go back on it." I mean, my jaw dropped when I read this. Did you not? What about the word he gave to Caroline? It's just, he just doesn't realise what he's saying. It's kind of endearing in as much as it's quite damaging to him, really.
Yeah. That is a funny moment. I like that you picked up on that. And it's, but that whole relationship, again, it was so public, I couldn't ignore it. And there's a very straight line between him ending their engagement and going on to play the best golf of his career. And he talks very eloquently about how he was kind of trapped in this life he didn't really want. He thought, okay, if you're in your early 20s and you're fabulously wealthy and famous and you're the top of your field, how can you find true love? And he said, I thought the answer was finding someone in the same position, which was Caroline. She was world number one, and they were the same age. And, you can imagine their pillow talk was unique because they were both at the top of their sport. But it put him into this life where, as he says, he was going from his tournament to her tournament to a corporate event to her tournament to his tournament. And he lost a sense of who he was. And not surprisingly, he was playing the worst golf of his career. And he kind of came to this ruthless determination that the golf is more important than the marriage. And it's maybe cold-hearted, but it's also honest. His destiny was to be a great golfer, and he wasn't willing to compromise that. And so now later in life, as he matures and he finds a way to balance it, but he wasn't ready when he was in his early 20s. And so, it was cold the way he just called her up and ended it, for sure. I'm sure he has some regrets around that, but he was on this path, and no matter how transfixing she was, he was not going to be deterred. And so that whole episode tells you a lot about him.
And that theme as well runs through from his love life to his business life, his relationship with his agents, and how he ends his relationships with his agents, and they're a little bit messy. and that's what you like about this book, because you're finding out everything. Everything is being put down, and then he's a genius, or he's been advised by somebody to make his agent his business partner, who's on the salary rather than a commission, and he saves himself $15 million on an endorsement deal, but that money we think is used to pay off the previous relationship. This book I find it's brilliant. It's a roller coaster.
Yeah, those little details, Alan, I think are spot on. Is it the agent stuff and then the amount of money? I think was it $18 million he paid to break relationship with his second agent? I think it was. Does that show that he has maybe trust issues? Are they going on there?
I think it was more like youthful, hubris. Things were moving very fast. He wins the U.S. Open, and all of a sudden, life gets very big, very fast. And Rory probably, when he signed the second contract, he didn't even have it vetted by a personal attorney. That was a mistake, and that was a mistake he'd never repeat. And to his credit, the beginning of his business life was very rocky, but then from there, he's built this empire. He's found the right people. He's empowered them. Rory McIlroy Incorporated now has 30 employees, and it's a money-making machine. And this year or next, Rory's going to become a billionaire as the son of a bartender. And it's not just the traditional, I'm going to endorse golf clubs and a sports drink. He founded a venture capital firm in 2019. And one of their first investments was with this medical device company. They would send, medical tests to your front door. Seems like an okay idea, no big deal. Then COVID hits and the business explodes. And he's made a number of very clever bets all along the way. And Rory dropped out of school at 15. I think he's always been self-conscious about that. He's a voracious reader. He likes to tell you what he's reading, in sort of a self-conscious way. But you look at the circles he moves in, two of his best friends are J.P. McManus and Durham Desmond. They're famous, billionaire businessman types. Kind of his godfather here in the U.S. is Jimmy Dunn, who is a superstar investment banker. And I think it's very important for Rory that when he's with these people, he can talk about business and not just golf. And so he's immersed himself in that world, and he listens, he asks good questions, he takes the advice, and he's now sitting on an empire. And so it's really impressive part of his life that he doesn't talk about very much. It's not very well known. And it was fun to explore in this book because it tells you a lot about Rory, and it's also going to help define his future, because I think there's going to come a day where when you're watching a golf telecast, Rory will disappear from the commercial breaks. I think he's going to let his Nike deal expire. I think he'll let his TaylorMade deal expire, because when you sign those deals, you're getting money, but what you're giving up is time for the photo shoots, for the TV commercials, for the corporate hobnobbing, for the product development. And I think Rory is making so much money in so many ways now, non-traditional ways for an athlete, that he's not going to need those deals. He's going to want to get the time back. And so he's arranged his life in a very clever way. And I think it actually will help his longevity on the golf course, because, and you're seeing it even right now as he's consolidated his schedule. He's not playing as many tournaments this year. Like, he wants to enjoy life. He wants to watch his daughter grow up. He wants to pursue these other things. But then he shows up at the Masters. He hasn't played a tournament in 3 weeks, and he goes out and wins it because he's fresh and he's competitively hungry. And so he's made so many great decisions. But it was, as you say, it was a very rocky start. The first 5 years of his career in his business life and his love life was very tumultuous. But to his credit, he's learned from that.
Neil Foggin has his big question, as ever. We haven't mentioned the Masters. We will do in this section. Not really talked about it too much, but we will in this section. And your big question is an obvious one now. Are we getting an update for the paperback with what's happened in the Masters this year?
It's even better than that. So generally the paperback will come out, a year after the book's release. And it's very traditional. You write a whole new chapter and bring things up to date and, give a little incentive maybe for people to buy the paperback. But, the book's been a success. It's been on the New York Times bestseller list. It was #1 in Ireland. And so Simon & Schuster and its subsidiary Avid Reader Press, they need to print more hardbacks. And so I have to give credit to my literary agent. He said, well, if we're printing new hardbacks, why don't we tuck a new chapter in and not wait for the paperback? And so I'm working on that chapter right now. And when the next hardbacks go to print in the next 3-4 weeks, it'll have a whole update on the 2026 Masters. And I personally, I'm sure it's happened, but I've never seen it where a hardback that comes out, a month or 6 weeks after the book release has new material. It's really cool. And I'm super excited about it because, that's always a risk. Books have a little bit of a lead time. You got to print them and distribute them. And we took this down to the wire. I was able to tuck in a few sentences about Brooks Koepka leaving LIV Golf. That happened in December for an April release. That's very rare, even that tight a turnaround. I love it because, you just want the book to be up to date. The 2025 Masters will always be the greatest moment of Rory's career. The catharsis around it, the emotion, the completion of this lifelong journey, it'll never be topped. But the 2026 Masters is in its own way just as important because it answers this question, like how badly does Rory want it? Is he going to keep chasing greatness? Is he going to try and fulfill his destiny? The answer was a resounding yes. And furthermore, the way he won it, we're used to Rory overwhelming a golf course, with his driver, but he drove the ball poorly most of the week this year's Masters. He won it with his putter and his wedge and his guile. He called himself a wily old vet. And it's quite an evolution, from a guy who could only sort of win one way. And now his game is so complete. His confidence is so high. He has so much know-how and belief that I think a lot of Rory's best golf is in front of him. I think that this Masters victory in 2026 makes that very apparent. And so I'm really happy we can tuck that into the book and get in people's hands. And then when the paperback comes out, next year, we'll see what else happens in 2026, and we'll just keep updating it because he's still in his prime. It's a lot of biographies come out 5-10 years after a player ends their career, and there's a value to that, and that you can kind of look back and have maybe a larger perspective. But I want this book to come out now because it's fun to be on this journey with Rory, and the book tells you how we got here. And, it kind of tantalizingly looks ahead to what might happen. Well, now we know, and we'll include it in the book. And so it's been fun to be part of this wave that he's been on.
Did you actually think he would win this year's Masters? When you were meeting your deadlines and submitting the original copy, did it cross your mind, what if he wins it again? He could win it again? Well,
it did. And so that's why we had to have the book come out before the Masters. And I said that all along. From the Ryder Cup to the Masters, nothing really important is on the golf calendar. It's nice that he won the race to Dubai, and I was able to mention that as well. But that's the European Tour money title. But really, it's the quietest time in the golf year. And so that was I'm going to finish the book after the Ryder Cup, and it's going to come out for the Masters because nothing can really happen that matters. Short of him flipping his car upside down on a road while he's high on painkillers. Something like that happens, then it's oh man. But golf wise, I felt like we were on safe ground, and I think people understand. At some point, you got to turn the book in, you got to print it, and that's just the way it is. And what was really fun is the release date was Tuesday of the Masters week, and so people got their books that week. And I was getting many tweets from folks who were watching the Masters and reading the book and feeling more invested in what Rory was doing. And, a couple of people said, I was saving the last few chapters until Masters Sunday. I finished reading the book. I turned the telecast on. I watched Rory win again. I've never been so happy. So it was cool that fans at home kind of had that experience of the book came, the Masters started, Rory won. It was all kind of part of this larger story.
Yeah, you've won. Basically, Alan, you've set up this franchise, and now you've completely won. On the Masters 2025, there's some great coverage of that in the book. And Jim Nantz, the celebrated American TV announcer, came out with something you quote on page 267 of the book. He said it's one of the greatest sports stories ever told. There's been a lot of sports stories told, some great ones as well. Why do you think he's right that this is one of the greatest sports stories ever told?
Rory was his phenom. He was tabbed for greatness at a young age, and he mostly delivered. And then, but there was one missing piece, and it was the most luscious of them all. It was the green jacket, and he took us on this decade-long quest, and there was a lot of heartbreak, and there was some triumph along the way, but he just couldn't quite deliver it. And then when he finally had the chance, Masters Sunday in 2025, it was not about golf. It was not about sport. It was such a human uh, test, and you could see the angels and the demons on Rory's shoulder, and you could see the weight of this journey, and it was absolutely riveting. And people who weren't golf fans, weren't even sports fans, got sucked into it because that's what makes tournament golf so riveting. Is there's nowhere to hide. You can't pass the ball to a teammate. You can't hide in the corner. Like you are all alone out there. And Rory had in real time he had to slay the dragon. And he was almost incinerated in the fire. He was almost chewed up and spit out. Like whatever, we can extend the metaphor forever. Like he he hit some of the worst shots in Masters history, and yet he persisted. And when he absolutely had to do it, he did it. And then that walk from the 18th green to the scoring area, this 5-minute walk that was chronicled on the telecast, and it was a genius bit of sports directing, no commentary. It was so cinematic, and you could see it, the whole story play out on Rory's face. All the toil, all the devastation, all the disappointment, and all of that just being lifted and released. And it was such an incredible, indelible moment. And I get into the book, like how many people were moved to tears by that, because again, we've been on this journey with Rory for so long, and he's let us in, and we've been invested in him, and we've been through these ups and downs, and we've sometimes given up on him, and he's thrilled fans, he's infuriated them, but they've always been there with him. And so for him to finally deliver and to see how much it meant to him, and just the catharsis of it, it was absolutely riveting.
Just a couple of things I want to throw in. We're running out of time, but you, chapter 20, you give your greatest golfers of all time. Again, no spoilers here, but you tell us where Rory ranks in that. I'm very disappointed Nick Faldo doesn't appear in that list, but that's open to opinion. One other thing is a good colleague of mine has got a dog called Rory because he loves Rory McIlroy so much. Another colleague of mine absolutely adores Rory McIlroy, always had. And he said to me, when he knew I was doing this show with this book that you've written, he said to me, "You've read the book. Do you actually like Rory McIlroy?" And I had to think long and hard, and I thought, yeah, do you know what? I wouldn't mind sitting down, having a drink with Rory McIlroy and speaking to him. Do you like Rory McIlroy?
Oh yeah, I've always liked Rory. I've always loved writing about him. And but it's not my job to tell people what to think about Rory or how to feel about Rory. And it was the same with the Mickelson biography. Like I just want to capture the totality of the man, of the human, and put it all out there for the readers, the good, the bad, the complex, the contradictory. And in Rory's case, I just think that on the whole, when you look at everything he's been through, everything he's done, you're left with a good feeling. Like he's just a fundamentally decent person. He's handled himself with a lot of grace, growing up in the spotlight. He's made his mistakes, but he's taken ownership of them. He's learned from them, and he's led a very admirable life. And so yeah, even though Rory threw a few F-bombs at me, we patched it up, and I think absolutely he's a good person, and I think he's easy to root for. And what was interesting, I've done the audio book, my last 3 books, but for this one, and as I was reading the last chapter in this little studio, I got emotional reading it, which never happened to me before. But just kind of feeling it all builds and builds. This whole book, it builds to the Masters, and then especially to the Ryder Cup, and then you get this beautiful happy ending. And like it hit me when I was reading it, and so yeah, in a very visceral way, I would say I'm a Rory fan, and it wasn't my intent of the book. I'm not a publicist. I'm not here to write hagiography. Like I'm here just to tell an honest story. But in Rory's case, he's an admirable person, and I felt it when I was in that recording studio.
Well, it's a book that makes you laugh, makes you cry. I've got a lump in my throat now, Alan. So listen, congratulations on the book. It really is a fantastic read, superb work yet again. from Alan Shipnuck. Thanks for joining us from the States.
Oh, it was delightful. Thanks for having me.
Brilliant. And Neil Foggin, thank you very much as well. Don't forget to get your books in. And thanks to you as well for being with us. Previous episodes of the William Hill Sports Book Club are available as podcasts and on the talkSPORT app or on the talkSPORT YouTube channel. We'll see you next time on the William Hill Sports Book Club.